Good morning and welcome to the fourth annual HBCU Tech Law Summit. I am Tasha Bunch, Administrative Director of the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice. We are thrilled that you all are joining us today for what will be a series of fantastic discussions in the field of law and technology. To kick things off, we have the founder of the Tech Law Summit, Charlie Bingham. Charlie is a graduate of Howard University School of Law, class of 2008, and he is also currently senior legal counsel at Splunk. So to get us started, Charlie, please take it away.
You got my video. Good morning, everyone. I think we're coming. You'll get me in a minute. But in the meantime, I'm honored to have you all join us today for our fourth annual, man, it sounds crazy saying that, but this is the fourth year, our fourth annual HBCU Tech Law Summit. I'm excited that our wonderful sponsors, who I will acknowledge shortly, has allowed us to expand beyond just Howard Law, where I went to law school, but also to include FAMU, North Carolina Central, and Southern University Law Center. To all of you, I want to say welcome. The key goal of this summit is to educate our attendees on the issues and opportunities in the tech industry in an effort to help infuse the legal workforce with a diverse pipeline to ensure fair, transparent, and accountable development of new technologies that empowers everyone. I think over the past couple of years, we've realized just how important technology is to our lives, especially during the pandemic and our need to work from home and still continue to conduct business in a way where basically corporations, law firms, and businesses don't stop. So you are in for a treat, because this year we have leading technology lawyers, policymakers, and entrepreneurs discussing cutting-edge issues and having lively debates. None of this is possible without our sponsors. So if you could, please join me in giving a virtual round of applause for the following sponsors. We have Perkins Coie, which is our platinum sponsor for this year. We have Verizon, which is a gold sponsor. Reed Smith, they are also a gold sponsor. Oric, the law firm, is also a gold sponsor. Then we have Womble, Baker and Hostetler, Fish and Richardson, Greenberg Trarick, Arndt Fox, Wilmer Hale. They are all silver sponsors. And we also have Frost Brown Todd LLC, which is an honorary sponsor. So without further ado, let's hear about the impact of racial bias in AI, facial recognition, and other technologies from our first panel. Back to you, Tasha.
Thanks so much, Charlie. As you mentioned, our first panel is the impact of racial bias in AI, facial recognition, and other technologies. And our moderator is Edward Fultz, an associate at Reed Smith, and also a graduate of Howard University School of Law, class of 2020. Edward, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Tasha, and thank you, Charlie, for this opportunity. I feel real grateful and appreciate to be here in this moment. Definitely a conversation that's much needed, not just today, but especially for the last 5 to 10 years. I'm happy the summit keeps doing this every year, and also grateful to be part of the Howard University School of Law family. So I appreciate it. Thank you. I am honored to be able to present my panelists. Definitely an incredible moment for each one of y'all. First, in no order from least great or great to least, we have Chanel Cornett. She's a policy counsel on the trust and safety team at Zoom, ironically the platform we are using, where she crafts policies to keep users safe on the platform. Prior to joining Zoom, Chanel was a legal and policy officer at Fair Trials, an international NGO where she worked on advancing and protecting criminal procedural rights through legislative drafting, legislative advocacy, and coalition building. Before Fair Trials, she spent her first year post-law school graduation working for California Attorney General Xavier Becerra's legal and policy advisory team on issues such as criminal justice, immigration, environmental justice, consumer protection, and healthcare. She's a graduate of Howard University School of Law. Thank you very much. Thank you. Where she held internships at the U.S. Security and Exchange Commission, the U.S. District Court of the District of Columbia, and the U.S. House of Representatives, among others. She attended undergrad at Marietta College in Marietta, Ohio, where she is currently a member of Marietta's Alumni Association Board of Directors. Chanel is a Cleveland, Ohio native based in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Chanel. Glad to have you.
Thanks so much, Edward.
No problem. Next, we have Collin Smith, who is a product attorney at Microsoft supporting Xbox hardware and accessories, the Applied Sciences Group, Surface Duo and Pen, and Microsoft Surface Development Centers in Tampere, Finland, and Tel Aviv, Israel. Before promotion to Principal Corporate Counsel, Collin supported Microsoft 365 engineering, including first and third-party APIs, artificial intelligence and machine learning, organizational analytics and intelligence, and Microsoft's new AI time management assistant, Cortana. Before joining Microsoft, Collin worked in-house at Chase, JP Morgan Chase and Company to be exact, in New York, handling a variety of privacy and technology impacting consumer banking, matters including regulatory inquiries and consumer complaints. Matters involving payment technologies such as Chase Pay, wire transfers and EFTs, and cryptocurrency. Collin also is one of 3 attorneys who helped develop an AI-inspired regulatory change management platform for JPMC's legal and compliance departments. Before becoming a lawyer, Collin served in the United States Army as a logistic officer, including a tour of duty to Iraq in 2010. We appreciate your service, Collin. We appreciate it. Collin holds a BS in Systems Engineering from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, which beat Navy, and a JD from the George Washington University Law School. In his time away from work, Collin enjoys spending quality time with his wife, Monica, 2-year-old son, Reed, gaming, snowboarding, and cooking. Thank you, Collin, for joining us. Appreciate it. And last, and of course not least, we have Adonne Washington. She's a 2020 graduate of Howard University School of Law. She is currently the Digital Justice Associate Counsel for the National Branch of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. The Digital Justice Initiative works at the intersection of racial justice, technology and privacy, predatory commercial data practices, discriminatory algorithms, invasions of privacy, disinformation, and online hate disproportionately target and harm communities of color, especially Black Americans, immigrants, women of color, and LGBTQ people of color. Adonne is also principal of her own law firm, AR Washington PLLC, where she offers trademark, copyright, and business law services to small business and creatives. Adonne received her BA in Social Relations and Policy with a minor in Public Relations from Michigan State University. Welcome, Adonne.
Good morning. Thank you, Edward.
No problem, no problem. Well, I don't want to do all the talking, of course, because you guys are not trying to hear from me, trying to hear from the panelists. So please, Chanel, talk about your path and how you got here, how you get into AI in the first place, and any other snippets that we should learn from.
Yeah, so how I started in tech, I actually just started at Zoom back in October. But initially when I was in law school, I, like others, was really interested in social justice and figuring out a way that I could best help, Black people and Black communities. So I originally was interested in criminal justice reform. So I worked at, the Public Defender, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and other places. And went on, like I said, after graduation to the Attorney General's office and an NGO, all doing criminal justice reform work. And I really enjoyed it, but I had always had an interest in tech. I'm really inspired by innovation and newness and solving problems and everything. So I began to do some research into the field, and I came across the trust and safety field And essentially what you're doing is crafting policies and enforcing those policies to ensure that users are safe whenever they're using your platform. So came across the policy position at Zoom and applied. And what I do now is, like I said, just craft those policies to make sure that people are behaving on Zoom, essentially. And in reference to AI, my job intersects with that because not so much Zoom, but in the content moderation and trust and safety space, AI is used as a substitute for human moderation. Perhaps due to the fact that there's a lot of user-generated content and there's a lot of scrutiny on the platforms to remove content quickly. So AI is used for that matter, and yeah, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Thank you, Chanel. Appreciate it. Collin, do you want to go next? Just talk about briefly on how you got here. How did you get involved in AI in the first place at Microsoft, at Chase, and other areas of work?
Yeah, no problem. And good morning, everybody. Early morning for me over here in Seattle, but I'm glad to be here. This is important stuff that we're doing, talking to everybody today. Yeah, so probably about, I would say now at this point, almost 13 years ago, 12, 13 years ago, maybe almost 14 years ago, I was just a young logistics officer in the Army. I had a platoon of soldiers under my command. And we, you oftentimes, to kind of echo what Chanel was saying, there are a lot of studies out there now, and there have been a few articles whereby, there appears to be a disproportionate punishment. There we go. That's better. Appears to be a disproportionate punishment for Black and brown soldiers or service members in the military. And so that was one of the things that inspired me to also want to go and become a judge advocate in the Army, which is, despite the fact of whether I was going to be assigned to be a prosecutor, legal assistance attorney doing civil matters, or even maybe criminal defense, the Army tells you what you're going to do. I wanted to make sure that I had an impact in a way to be able to affect the lives of the Black force, the Black soldiers. So even if I was at a time when I was titled as a trial counsel, where you are essentially like the prosecutor for your unit, even then I was trying to make fact-based, fair recommendations to the commander when it came to recommending a disciplinary action for a soldier. And so that's kind of how I became or got interested and then decided to go to law school and get involved that way. Found myself at JP Morgan when I got out. I'll be totally honest. I think I got lucky a little bit getting that job. It was, I had gotten out of the Army in 2016. And nobody helped me pretty much with anything. It's a reason why I'm here today too. If I can get on my soapbox for a little bit, it's about trying to give back and help people out. Nobody helped me get to where I am at Microsoft. And so every opportunity that I get, especially when we're talking about brothers and sisters, I try to help out and give back and make sure that folks can get a little bit of that inside information on how to nail an interview, or just to make network connections, because we all know that, half of this is who you know too. Started working a little bit in AI at JP Morgan. They were trying to make almost essentially like an AI research assistant. Software development's really hard. And so if you're a bank that doesn't like to spend money on technology, and you are trying to cut costs on your software engineering, you're probably not going to get the type of product or platform that you're looking for. But after a couple of years, I decided it was time to do something else. It actually goes back in time. I met Microsoft or some representatives from Microsoft when I first got out of the Army, and they told me I was too junior and I needed to get some more experience for a couple of years, and then to call back, and then we can continue the conversation. So I got 2 years of experience and called them back and said, okay, I got the 2 years of corporate experience, so now I'm ready. So let's talk about coming over there. And that was like I think it shocked them. Kind of shocked me too, because I'm not typically that brave, I guess. And then that's how I ended up here and working with the Office 365 and Microsoft 365 folks. And then from there, it's been just like, you know, knees, waist, ears deep in AI machine learning stuff. So that's kind of my story, and I'll pass it back to Edward.
I appreciate Collin, and we do appreciate your service and everything you did for this country. We appreciate it. 10 years is a long time, correct? It's a long time. And we do appreciate your service also waking up at 6 a.m. in Seattle, attending this 9 a.m. Eastern time zone panel. We appreciate it as well. We see your dedication. We love it. And now Adonne Washington, please, same question. Tell us how you got here and your connection towards AI.
Yeah, thanks, Edward. So my third year at Howard, I took Professor Jamar's artificial intelligence course, and it was a paper-based course, so we had to investigate AI and the law and what that kind of looked like. And it was new for him as it was new for us. And it was a very good exploration into understanding artificial intelligence, machine learning, and where that's going. Chanel mentioned innovation and newness. And I think that's a good way to put it, because I was also attracted to where is this technology going? It's kind of intertwined in everything, in every aspect of our lives. And so I wanted to understand that, especially from the legal perspective. And that was also a new field in its own right. And so in that course, we kind of looked at a lot of different areas and had a very wide-ranging conversation, you know, why it's useful, but also where it falls and why it's harmful. And based on that, I started looking for positions that could kind of marry what I was interested in, which was somewhat intellectual property, but also artificial intelligence and kind of the civil rights perspective and how this technology disproportionately impacts Black and Brown individuals. And so I ended up as a fellow at the Lawyers Committee in the same position with the Digital Justice Initiative based out of DC. And we started investigating immediately. My first month there, I started investigating the California bar exam's use of facial recognition technology. I had actually taken the bar exam using that same technology and encountered similar issues, as well as many others who did. And so really understanding kind of in my first few weeks the impact that this technology has on individuals in, you know, just trying to take a bar exam so that they can then go on to their career was really kind of what led me to stay with the Lawyers Committee into this next year to really continue the investigation on how these technologies are impactful. Artificial intelligence, facial recognition technology, misinformation, disinformation online, as Edward mentioned, those are kinds of things that we investigate at a wide range, but also looking at the advocacy and policy side, you know, where are the protections in the laws that exist and how can we implement them either at a state level or more hopefully at a federal level, and understanding where the protections need to be, but also making sure that those civil rights protections exist in all of these technology-based bills and legislation, because the civil rights aspect is what's going to protect those who are disproportionately impacted online. And I'll kind of leave it there.
No, thank you, Adonne. And definitely mentioning the bar. I remember the DC bar was as well using AI interface technology, and I definitely had to take a couple photos to recognize my face. And so moving on with the discussion, I'm gonna go back to you, Chanel, just go back in the beginning so everybody has a chance to speak. Once again, baseline conversation in regards to like the title. When you hear the impact of racial bias in AI, in facial recognition, other technology, what does that mean to you? And how do you play a part of it in your role at Zoom and other areas that you are involved in?
Yeah, I think to me, the impact of racial bias in AI, I think it means like being aware that, you know, this technology that we think can be used for good can also be used for bad. And I think it's comes from awareness from the top level, you know, with the companies that are employing it, and it also comes from the people who are building it. It also comes from the people who are creating the policies that surround it. So for me in my work, it comes out of that awareness of understanding like how it can be used badly and speaking up, you know, in the creation of it, and being able to, you know, say like to the people who are making it and employing it, hey, you know, we need to make sure that we're accounting for diverse perspectives and diverse communities when we're putting in the data. So yeah.
No, I appreciate it. Collin, to you, same question. The title of this presentation, the impact of racial bias in AI, facial recognition, and other technology. What does that mean to you? How does that play for a part of you in your role at Microsoft?
I think you know, it's important, you know, we know Microsoft specifically, while us and other companies continue to develop. And first of all, let me back up a little bit. It's a non-attributive environment, so we're going to go ahead and put that out there. But us and others, I think we, you know, during 2020, we saw what happened with George Floyd, and all the unrest, the protests that were going on all that year. We responded, others responded. You know, I think the one thing that was most impactful was a commitment not to sell facial recognition technology to law enforcement any longer. You know, it doesn't take a lot of deep research or online, you know, searching online to see that the veracity of facial recognition technology is very poor when it comes to darker skin tones. You know, we're just as likely to be confused with one another, even if we look not even that similar, as we are to be confused if like between myself and Chanel or myself and Adonne. It's like, you know, the technology can't even distinguish oftentimes with Black folks between men and women. And so I think that's one of the things that's super important to make sure that we mention off the top. But, you know, the facial recognition technology, you know, it does have a lot of, you know, applications we call like, you know, AI for good. You know, the way that you can log into your phone, you can don't have to remember a million passwords because you can use, you know, just your unique password that you wear every day to unlock your accounts and other things like that. So I think that the impact that we have there that we're working on here too, I think folks will see that a lot in the world from a lot of different companies as more and more folks in the tech industry start to realize that, you know, there's a lot to be gained by trying to do it the right way, rather than trying to make it a race to the bottom, so to speak. So.
No, fair point. We're going to touch upon that later in this conversation about AI for good and the purpose of it all with this universal passcode of facial experiences on like your phone. I don't like my Xbox the other day, you're using my face. I'm like, okay, that's, you know, I like it, but it's funny because it does make things easier in the sense of I still have a book with all my passcodes for my different emails, my different accounts. But, you know, sometimes we don't think about the harm in that. It's like, wait a minute, they have my face in a database somewhere in, you know, the European Union or in America. And now this facial expression can be used for anything, for bad, for harm, or just, you know, on a marketing ad that I don't know about. So that's a good point. And we're going to touch on that later, Collin. Adonne, I don't think I need to repeat the question, but the same question in regards to the title. Please take it away.
No, I'm so sorry. Could you please repeat the question?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize. Yes, so the title of our presentation, the impact of racial bias in AI and facial recognition, other technologies. What does that mean to you? And how is your role at the Lawyers Committee represent that involvement?
Yeah, thank you. So I think both panelists have touched on a lot of key key aspects that I kind of work on a day-to-day basis. And part of that is understanding that this technology is here. As much as we wish all of these things could have been hashed out and the bias eliminated, or the conversations to not use it before it's already been deployed, we've come past that stage. And so we understand that it's going to exist and it's going to be around. So how do we make it less harmful? And additionally, where are the instances where we need to recognize that it was deployed before we fully understood its impacts, or before we fully had, the risk assessment or any safeguards put in place? And we can pause it, we can stop it, put a moratorium on it for a certain period of time, such as in Baltimore with their facial recognition technology that the police had deployed. And so they did the full moratorium just in Baltimore. But you have these instances where the tech companies are so excited about the tech, and they think it's so helpful, and they think that it makes things more efficient and more accessible, and wow, look at this shiny new thing. And for a while with technology, I think it was just kind of culturally, that's what we went to. We went to the next iPhone, we went to the next computer, and we kind of just kept going with it before we really understood all of the impacts and all of the ways in which tech could be harmful. Chanel makes a great point. The people who are building the technology matter. And I think that's kind of where we all came to, I think that's probably where we all kind of ended up in this situation and in the jobs that we have, understanding that those who look like us should definitely be on the side of building enforcement, understanding, and to catch those things that others might not. And so, I can't say that I love facial recognition technology and I would like it to stay in all aspects, but I do understand that it's here, and where do we put the safeguards in place and the guardrails to make sure that it is not harmful and the least harmful. Again, I think the biggest problem is a lot of this has gone forward with no rules, no regulation. And so a lot of the work that we do on the policy side of things also, looks at calling out the FTC and looking at the mechanisms that are in place in the government, the mechanisms that are in place at a governmental level, at an agency administration level that can be used now to kind of stop some of the harmful impacts and stop some of the uses, like the IRS and the ID me that happened a few weeks ago.
Well, thank you, Adonne. I appreciate it. No, it's definitely a tool. I think we say it all the time: good for bad, for worse, and for the ugly. And maybe we get into ahead of ourselves, because maybe I've been hearing around the last couple of years, like, what is AI? Is it machine learning? Do we have true AI with really, a Skynet, Terminator, Matrix, employment where it thinks for itself? And I would say, no, we don't have true AI yet, meaning the ability for lack of a better term, a machine to think for itself without any data input going into it. So that's the biggest thing. Today, AI, it's say that for a presentation standpoint, but also AI learns from different inputs is getting received. And from there, after there's a bunch of calculations in his head, it'll lay a predicament or a probability of what to occur. So the problem to me, and this is my opinion, please speak on this, is the data input going into the machine to process information. Usually this data does not look like us, or there's the lack of representation of us. So the AI can do its thing and calculate these assessments to give a prediction or probability of a result. So please, anybody can take on that train of thought per se. Anybody want to take the first stab? Collin, go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing that I honestly, I see it every single day at work. Our AI and machine learning models are only as good as training data that you feed them right now. Just like you said, it's not Terminator. They're not just getting up and walking around on their own and doing all this. There are people who, there's people that argue that it could go that direction, and then there's, I think, me personally, I think we're a long way from AI and machine learning taking people's jobs. I know that was real popular probably about 6 to 10 years ago. Any news article talking about AI was the robots are coming for your jobs. Until you actually see how some of this stuff works, like it's not taking anybody's job anytime soon. So that's the the first part of it. But that's the main thing that I would add is that to the point that you made earlier, the AI and machine learning, or machine learning models that learn from training data are only as good as the training data. And so that's step one in that. And then you also hit on step number two, which is that when we're talking specifically about facial recognition technology, to dovetail off of my quote of it's only as good as the training data, they don't use good training data for Black people and Black faces and otherwise in the first place. There's first of all not enough data because for a variety of different reasons, none so far as like me, like a lot of y'all listening also might be, is as a Black person, personally, I'm not trusting anything that's going to be trying to, other than a handful of things that are trying to take my facial ID or my face data. I don't know if anybody's at the airport, you see like clear, I don't know, it's a things like that, right? So we're not actually participating in a lot of areas where we're providing a ton of that face data or that training data for these models. And then the other side of that, on the back end of it, is bias or racism in development and in the engineering of the model in the first place, which is, whether it's deliberate or probably arguably more often implicit bias, just totally not even nobody's nefariously trying to develop. Well, maybe some people are out there, but they're, by and large, most companies, when they're trying to make these things and engineers sitting down figuring this out and coding it, they're not sitting there and trying to code in, okay, I'm going to make sure that this machine learning model hates Black people and gets it wrong. So there's not a lot of money to be made when your model is only good on a subset of the population. It's not good for a huge subset of the population, the rest of the world. So I think those are the two areas that we, that there needs to be improvement on if we want to see this become something that is, more of a wide reach for good, which is we just don't have the training data, and then we got to figure out how to tackle the implicit bias in the development of it.
Yeah, I would also add too, in addition to the data, with AI, like there's a lack of context. So especially like in the content moderation space, like, for instance, we have African American vernacular, or in certain communities you use certain terms, right? And the issue with the AI is it's making an automated decision. It's not a human, so it can't really gauge, okay, maybe they use this term, but they're using it in this context, and maybe they said this thing, but it's in this particular context. So there's a lack of that as well. And I think, as we innovate and build more models, I think there needs to be a push for them to account for context as well.
Yeah, accounting for context. And I think, we need the ability to not only have the context, but we need to understand, the building level at the building stage. And we need to have constant updates and risk assessments to ensure that while, the data and everything that's going into the model is functioning properly and not having those discriminatory impacts. And so I'll leave it there. I don't want to talk too far out of my depth in terms of the technology side and where that goes. But I do know that there have been instances, I think LinkedIn actually employed it was a pop-up kind of quiz that came to different individuals recently, and it was trying to collect some of the voluntary information about race or zip code and things like that, because it wants to then turn that information into stronger and more wide-ranging and varied data that goes into it. I'm not saying it's a perfect model, but some of those instances we are also thinking about in legislation, right? So not saying just stop everything, but having the opportunity for these tech companies and those who employ the different types of technology to gain more varied and more diverse data so that they can then have better informed outcomes.
No, of course, Adonne. And I know that feeling where you don't want to get too far beyond your perspective. Because like I said, we're lawyers. We're not scientists. We're not developers. We're not programmers. I know the program a little bit. I took some coding for about 3 to 4 years, but I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I know the basics. But it's interesting, those conversations, it's kind of like, who needs to be in the room to conduct proper AI technology? You know, lawyers, scientists, you're in the healthcare profession, definitely a doctor to make sure this healthcare data is being represented in multiple ways. And so how do y'all feel about that, about who needs, and now we're trying to talk about the solution-based orientation of this. How should AI be conducted in a way for it to be involvement of all, or is it impossible because of the data and the qualifiers of how to, you know, the filtering of who can be what, where, or maybe a more basic question is, who needs to be in the room for these to get done properly? And anybody can take it on as well. I don't want to keep going around robin, but Chanel, go ahead, please. The Zoom platform that we're working on.
Well, this is just my personal opinion, but I think just in general, like, we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves, and we can't take humans out of the process. So whatever we're deploying it on, we have to make sure that it's being used as a tool and not like as like the ultimate like solution. Like, humans need to still be in the room and work collaboratively with the tech, right? So we need all humans at the table. Like, we need something that's representative of what our role looks like, and not, you know, just one set of human building it, making the decisions, and doing all of that. So yeah, I'm a firm pusher of we can't just be all AI. Like, we have to work in collaboration with it. So yeah.
So, and then the hard part with that is so I'm going to use the GDPR as an example, which is a great, it is, I think it is good. I mean, it's a good thing that somebody on earth decided to step up and try to put into place some kind of regulation to try to tell, you know, these companies out here how to act when it comes to people's personal data. And I see Charlie has said in the chat, what's the GDPR? It's a General Data Protection Regulation from the European Union. It's the kind of right now it's the preeminent data protection and privacy regulation on the world. And then specifically, at least for, you know, Microsoft, and I think this is echoes for a lot of other companies. I mean, it's kind of like it doesn't really matter whether you're in the EU or not. We just decided, okay, the way we're going to do everything is GDPR across the board worldwide. So, so the hard part, though, what Chanel said, is that GDPR, for a lot of personal data and other data that is collected along the way, specifically says humans aren't allowed to put eyes on it. And so you have this circumstance now where at least it feels kind of like, and we're seeing a little bit of this in day-to-day stuff at work as well, that AI development's kind of slowing down to a point where it's not making those exponential leaps that it was making before, where people were starting to say, well, in 10 years, half of the job force is going to be, you know, run by robots. So I think that's the hard part too, which is, you know, we have one strong regulation that says what you can and can't do, subject to hefty fines. And so it has teeth, and it happens all the time. And then on the other side of that is we need it. We need to be able to have, like you said, humans in the loop to make sure that people are making sure that the bot is not behaving poorly, basically. And for a variety of other reasons too. Bug fixes everything. It just make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And so I think that's where we come in as the lawyers, whether you are a product counsel for, you know, products like I am, or you work in policy, you work in government affairs. It doesn't matter where you work. We all have a role to play in our particular sphere of influence to make sure that we're trying to move that conversation, or kind of move that needle in the direction of what I would say is trying to get the tech industry to no longer have to solely be self-regulatory. So where we're you know, in the United States, at least, oftentimes, you know, really kind of hoping and praying that everybody just does it the right way, because there's not a lot of law out there in the U.S. that kind of determines how we're supposed to do this. So, you know, there's Illinois has a good biometric statute, and then California has the CCPA. But aside from that, I mean, there's a lot of talk about it. You know, here in Washington, the Washington State government for years now has been kicking around this like kind of GDPR-ish, you know, state privacy statute. I think there's one that's been introduced in the House or the Senate as well, but I think it was introduced in like 2016 or something like that. I think it was Senator Cory Booker, and it's gone nowhere. Or maybe if it's gone nowhere, it's moving very slowly, which is the other part of, you know, we in the tech industry moves way faster than the government, and so that's where I say, you know, we have to continue to kind of be self-regulatory, but then also make sure that we're kind of helping the government along the way to get the regulatory space in a place to where, you know, we can continue to do business, continue to innovate, but do all of that in the right way.
Oh, of course. And Adonne, do you want to speak on that as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. It was teed up perfectly. I was like, oh, this is where I fit in. So yeah, I was going to mention California is the only state to really take a big stab at trying to protect and give consumers the ability to protect their, and Veronica mentioned to us, privacy. So privacy is one of the underlying concerns in all of this. And as you mentioned as well, BIPA, the Biometric Information Privacy Act in Illinois, not only allows consumers to call out tech companies, it gives them a private right of action to, excuse me, seek limited damages against these companies when they violate their privacy and do things against their consent. So there are things out there. There are different states who have taken the leaps and bounds to try and give their citizens the rights and allow individuals to have a better understanding and hold these tech companies kind of accountable for what they're putting out there and how that affects everyone. As you mentioned, I think one of the bigger things, there have been several bills in legislation at the federal level that have come up here and there. And some are better than others. And I think part of that is who they're talking to, who's in those rooms when the conversations are occurring about tech. And so calling out the issues is a wonderful thing to see happen, but they also need to be informed about how this tech is working and what needs to be in their legislation so that it's effective and has teeth at a federal level. States can continue to do different things, and that's wonderful, but you also see states who do things in the opposite way, who have broad bills and broad legislation. Virginia has legislation that's not the best in terms of privacy and technology protections. And you see other states, Utah actually is in the process of kind of rolling out something that has even less protection than kind of what Virginia does. And so you kind of see the issues where we don't have the federal legislation, and we want to make sure that the conversations that are being had with these different offices and raising awareness to the individuals, and I'm just going to go back to the facial recognition or the IRS's use of ID.me. And for those who aren't familiar, the IRS tried to employ the ID.me technology, which required Americans to do facial recognition to access their IRS account and their taxes. And it was a major red flag, as ID.me was largely there's no regulation, and ID.me was kind of just kicking around their technology to different state governments, in addition to different governmental and federal agencies. And so the issue with ID.me and facial recognition technology was we talked to different civil rights groups and advocates, and having those conversations and a large outcry of, hello, stop, this is inaccurate, this is wrong, there's got to be something else that we can do, can be beneficial. I'm not saying it's not the final solution, but the more that people are becoming aware of what is occurring and the uses of technology around them and how that could disproportionately impact them, especially especially Black and Brown communities, and those in other minorities, it's going to be a step in the right direction. And so, I think I think back to your original question, who needs to be in the room? Everyone needs to be in the room. Everyone who has a voice, everyone who's going to be impacted by this needs to have a space in that room, in addition to the room where the tech is being presented, right? So to police stations, there's instances in Florida where police officers were using facial recognition technology to identify different individuals, but they didn't really know how that technology worked. And so when they were doing their police reports, they weren't acknowledging that they had used that technology. Obviously, that was causing issues because they were arresting people and not really having the actual ability to say why they had probable cause. And so we also need people in the room where the technology is being presented. You can't just give it to the different departments, give it to different police agencies and say, here, it does this one cool thing, and take the word of the company that handed it to you. And so also, and this kind of just goes back to the tech's not going anywhere. So we need to have someone in place at every level to make sure that people are understanding when they're using it as well.
No, thank you, Adonne. We appreciate it. And you definitely teed me up as well. I like this transition we're about to go into. Just to mention, I believe this past legislative cycle, I think they introduced another version of the Aggravated Accountability Act. It's such a tongue twister, the AAA, from the Democrats, Wyden, Booker, and Clark. So that was on the table as of early last month. So once again, another version of the same bill we've been trying to negotiate and pass over the last 3 to 4 years, like you mentioned, Collin. As I talked about earlier, we want to talk about more about, and once again, everybody has talked about this, Adonne, Collin, Chanel, in regards to this facial recognition universal password that we're using. Everybody knows about it. All of us have some type of smart device, whether it's your phone, computer, gaming software, or even my apartment door is based on my key code, my fingerprint. There's no key no more. It's a fingerprint. I'm like, I don't remember signing nothing about this. I don't remember a consent form. I don't remember, I guess there's some liability in my lease that says they can change the locks when they need to. But now everybody in the apartment has a finger key code with a numerical password, but it only targets your finger. I'm like, there's a lot going on here, but I'm gonna discuss this later. So how do you feel about this notion of a universal password? Does it make people's lives easier? Of course, there's some red flags. What's everybody's opinion on that?
It's one where it's the old classic lawyer answer of it depends. It's like I said, it's got a lot of utility. I mean, it's a lot easier to if you think about the history of passwords and technology, we went from, everybody was using their mom's maiden name to all of a sudden that you got to add numbers to it because people can guess those, to now it's got to be 16 alphanumeric characters and special characters to, now they're, and sometimes you got to use a CAPTCHA or reCAPTCHA to log in, plus your password now to make sure you're not a bot. And then eventually arrived at like the 1Pass. I think 1Pass was like one of those first companies that tried to consolidate.
Don't forget the secondary authentication on Google Gmail, where it goes to your phone to a 6-digit password.
Yeah,
now you gotta find your phone.
Yeah. The MFA or 2FA or two-factor or multi-factor authentication, yes. Which is
my favorite one, by the way.
Mine too. So I'm gonna soapbox for everybody listening right now. If you do not have multi-factor authentication turned on every account that you were able to turn that on, please turn that on right now. There's only one person or one way to access your phone number specifically via MMS or SMS. So that's a super secure. Turn it on. Do not be out there with just your account with a username and password, please. It's hackers are too good at this. So anyway, okay, off the soapbox on that. No, I mean, I think it's got a lot of utility. I think it depending upon all the factors that we're talking about today, is where it depends, which is, who's the custodian of that data? What kind of access as a consumer do you have to control what is done with your data, whether it's stored, deleted, exported, otherwise? Those are probably the two of the things at the forefront which is one of the things that we try to, I think California in particular is trying to do with the CCPA, and that we need more regulation, from the top down, and not just state by state, on ensuring that the consumer, us, you and I, all have, as close to 100% control over that data as possible, so that at the moment's notice that you decide you don't like the fact that that somebody somewhere, maybe, or even if it's not necessarily a smart device, you don't like that door lock on your front door has your thumbprint data, you can take control of that and get that deleted as soon as you want. I think that's the main thing that we all have to be thinking about when it comes to whether something like that can be one of those, AI or machine learning for good types of applications, or whether it's, allowing folks who you don't want to have your data to collect your data.
I appreciate it, Collin. And just, we want to definitely open up the questions as well, but please, I want to hear Chanel's and Donnie's thoughts on this. But this is the opportunity now. You guys have questions, write them in the chat. We may be able to unmute you, not sure about that feature yet, but definitely we want it to be interactive. So please lay your questions out so we can address them. Go ahead, Chanel.
Yeah, so your question about, in general, like, how do I feel about, the universal password, or I'm gonna just broaden it to AI in general. Like, I agree with Collin that it has a lot of utility, but I think it's important that, like, we're having foresight and we're thinking about the potential risks and trying to mitigate those while we're building it, right? So, like, I think that humans and engineers and stuff, we're so focused on, like, okay, we have this problem now, and how can we solve it right now? And, what tool can we build to solve it right now, right? Whereas we need to think ahead of, okay, now we have the product, what are all of the potential risks that, like, what are all of the things that could go wrong? We need all of the communities there in that process to talk about those things, right? We think about, like, even to go back to, like, the cavemen and where we began, like, we built weapons to eat, right? But now we have a weapons problem where we're killing each other, right? So, like, we need to have some foresight into the risks while we're developing these technologies, even if they do have utility and even if they can be used for good.
No, of course, I appreciate it. And once again, if you have questions, please raise your hand and we may be able to unmute you and turn your video on to answer that question. Adonne, please. I didn't mean to keep interrupting everybody, but just to make sure the instructions are clear.
Sorry, give me 2 seconds, sir. 2 questions, and I want to see if I can answer either of them.
Yes. Oh, you told me in the chat. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's like a few questions.
Oh no, it's great. It's great. I'll read them out loud for you, Donnie. Don't worry about it. I'll do. Yeah, I'll make your life easy. All right. Let me make your life easy. All you gotta do is think for me. That's all you gotta do. For Ian, thank you. The question is, this brings to mind questions as to the ubiquity of data harvesting and who is responsible for ensuring that the data is accurate. Who holds liability and who isn't? So I think it's more of a statement than a question. And I think we briefly talk about it, but Donna, you want to briefly mention that comment?
Yes, but I can't say that I'll have the perfect answer for you. So ensuring that the data is accurate and holds liability if it isn't. It's gonna come down to the company. Collin had mentioned sometimes we hope that most of these individuals who are creating the resources to data harvest and collect information are not doing it for nefarious reasons. And we do hope that that is the case in the instance that someone is data harvesting for the sake of selling that data or giving it out on the internet or doing things. I guess what comes, giving it, I'm so sorry. Let me not. If either of you have a better answer, this I will pass to you.
I'm interested to hear what you were going to say. I think it's don't feel, we're all
the liability, obviously the liability falls on those that are collecting. The problem is there's nothing how do we hold them liable?
There's nothing to enforce that liability.
Yep.
Correct. And I think that's where my struggle comes in. So the data harvesting occurs and it happens, and data could be accurate, it could not be accurate, but enforcing the liability is kind of up in the air. So like I said, or like we've both mentioned, Collin and I have mentioned, BIPA, the Biometric Information Privacy Act in Illinois, it does allow for individuals to say, hey, my information is posted here, whether it be right or wrong, and they actually have the ability to go after the company that put their information out there or collected their information without their consent. But that is a standalone and one of a kind. And so the liability, you know, it's hard to hold the individuals, companies liable. It's also hard to point the finger at the technology. It's difficult, such as with Facebook, to prove that they are doing the targeted advertising, that they are actually at fault. We have the different things that allude to that, but coming to the liability aspect of it, I think is where I struggle trying to give you the best answer, and I do hope that helped.
Yeah,
That helped. Go ahead, Collin, please.
No, you're right. One of the biggest, you know, trying to nail down who would be liable when there are a multitude of places out there that are doing this harvesting of data, as we mentioned. And when I mention this, I know that, you know, obviously companies like Amazon and Microsoft and Facebook, I'm calling them Facebook, I refuse to call them Meta. You know, maybe I'm getting old, but anyway, there's data collection that occurs because, you know, people love to say that, you know, they don't want any company in any of their stuff at all. And it's like, well, you know, some of the things that you really like about the tech you use today is because we're people that are able to use some of the data that you provide voluntarily, right? So you can't just say like, no, you can't have any of my data, because then the consumer, like a lot of consumers will say, is that doesn't work. I don't like it. It's like, well, you know, of course it doesn't work. It needs data to work, right? The problem is though, is we have people out here who just harvest whatever they can, right? They're just out there trawling the internet, scraping away. It could be bad data. It could be, you know, explicit content, all sorts of types of things. And then because of the way that the GDPR is made, how this development goes for us, it becomes very difficult for companies that are trying to do this the right way to be able to obtain useful data sets. And so, you know, people create these data sets by doing what we mentioned, that this harvesting, and then package it up and then offer it for sale. And so the only way that you can get a big chunk of good quote unquote training data is to pay somebody for it. And then there's this risk as to whether is the data good or is it crap? And a lot of times it's a bunch of crap. But, you know, if you're talking about particularly like text data, was one thing that worked out was predictive text, which is like, can be pretty useful. And all you got to do is to write an email, apparently something, depending on how good the prediction is hit the tab key over and over and your message is done. Pretty cool, unless the data set that you're trying to feed through your model to teach it on how to do this is loaded with racial slurs. And then what do you do? And then who's responsible when the predictive text predicts a racial slur while you're sitting there in front of your device? Do you blame Microsoft? Do you blame Apple or Google? Or is it the engineer's fault? We're talking about implicit bias in development. What if the engineer, the person who wrote the model, was sitting there just working super hard to make sure that nothing was racist in his code or her code? They're sitting there typing away, working on this thing, QA, QC, the whole 9 yards. You can have like Microsoft does, you know, a whole on AI for good organization that you have to get approval before you deploy a new model into the actual production environment. All these things can go right. And then because there was some bad data that, you know, that at scale, you can't look at everything. Now your model is messed up. Now your model is making biased decisions. We see some of this when people are talking about how this is used for housing markets, and particularly how it's like a comeback of redlining because of the way that some AI machine learning models are being used. And so I think that's what, like Adonne said, like, how can we hold folks accountable? And I think that's when we turn to people like that to be able to be driving that policy discussion and everything else, to make sure that there's at least there's got to be some kind of standard and some kind of way to hold folks accountable somehow, that works, to make sure that this doesn't happen. And I think, it's gonna probably be, whoever deployed the technology. I mean, that wouldn't make my clients happy to hear that, and wouldn't make the business happy to hear that. But, when folks that are creating these data sets are like, almost like I said, the equivalent of the dude in the mom's basement in the dark, you know what I mean? You can't find that person, is the point that I'm making. They create these data sets. They don't exist for the most part. They're anonymous. And so you go to whoever, sometimes whoever can pay too. And, that's the big companies with the big bucks, unfortunately. So.
No, of course.
Tough problem to solve. Yeah, for sure.
No, Collin, you make a great point. And like I said, I call those kids in the basement the cool kids. They're the cool kids. They're the one making the money behind the scenes, and nobody knows your name. Imagine like being famous, but nobody knows you, and you're still making great money. So there's always a great balance of that. And Adonne, I think it's difficult to answer that question because we don't know. I mean, I think we all, law policymakers, lawyers, scientists, developers, program, we're all trying to figure it out. We're all trying to, so that's why it's hard to answer who is liable, who's going to enforce it from a regulatory, from a federal, from a state, local standpoint. Should, space get involved, NASA, who can get involved in the technology? Like the tech companies, Facebook/Meta, don't let me get started. Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, all these companies are trying to figure it out, but we're all in this flux saying, what do we do? No one's really talking about it and go into that nature. I think we have time for one more question. Let me see in the chat. Did I miss a question in the chat, anybody? I don't think I did. But any last, as we try to get a question in, any last minute thoughts about anything? Chanel, do you want to speak about just last parting thoughts about this important topic and how should we continue the conversation?
There's actually a question from Veronica, actually, about, what is it? Recommendations for being the voice in the room when you're the only one speaking up. That's a hard one, because speaking up it's tied to our jobs, it's tied to our livelihood. And, I am inspired by, the Facebook whistleblower, the Pinterest whistleblower, the Google whistleblower, right? But, they had to depart the company, right? So, yeah, I think the first question to ask yourself is what are your values? When you go up to speak, be aware of the possibility that the worst could happen, like you could lose your job. But if it's in line with your values, then that should be a decision that shouldn't be too hard for you to make, right? So yeah, did Collin or Donnie, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I appreciate Chanel. And that was important. I mean, what are your values? What's the purpose and intention of this? And of course, money, capitalist society, profits. I mean, Collin can speak about this more than me, dealing with Microsoft, but that's what it's all about. I mean, yeah, that's like the baseline, but no one really think about the ethics of it all. To me, is always the problem. And anything, not just AI, in all aspects, education, politics, medicine, all avenues where some